Okay, I think we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's call. I am Laura Heritage. I am a Principal Solution Architect for Enterprise API Platforms at SOA Software. I have been working with companies all over the world for the past 10 years, establishing both API and SOA strategies. In my last webinar a few weeks ago, I introduced the concepts of enterprise API adoption patterns. And I covered the internal, mobile, partner, and external adoption patterns at a really introductory level. Today what I'm going to do is focus specifically on the internal adoption pattern. If you have questions, same as last time, if you could send the questions to the chat, but can you make sure you send the questions to everyone or directly to Roberto, who's the host? Because last time when the session ended, all of the ones that were sent directly to me, I lost them after the session ended. It was my mistake. So I only got a few of the questions, and there were so many I couldn't keep track. And then what I usually do is I take all the questions and I will blog about it afterwards. Otherwise, you can send an email to me. I have my email posted along with my Twitter handle, whichever way you prefer to get a hold of me. Okay, so let's get started. If I can get this to advance. All right. As we all know, APIs bring on the promise of extending the reach of your business, enabling you to reach the consumers in ways that you haven't even dreamed of yet, right? Because you're going to be leveraging this whole external community of developers, partners, mobile, and so forth. And these APIs really enable you to get to the cloud and to the mobile and into the Internet of Things, or so they promise. But how do you get there? How do you extend the reach of your enterprise if your internal house is not in order? When I speak with enterprises about APIs, they all say they need to get there. They have the vision. They want to go there. But they always say, we're not mature enough to have an API. We'd like to, but like most companies, they think the term API means an internal API. It's kind of got that connotation associated with it now. But as in my previous, and as I mentioned earlier, there are four main adoption patterns that I'm seeing right now. Again, internal, mobile, partner, and external for innovation. A majority of the enterprises are starting with enabling APIs internally. That's where the largest bucket is of innovation around APIs are happening right now as enterprises are trying to transform. And when they are innovating internally, we see a bunch of usage scenarios or different patterns where enterprises are trying to leverage internally APIs to really start driving or preparing them for that external. Some very large enterprises are starting within a particular line of business, right? You've got a particular line of business that's very innovative, and they kind of take charge and lead the way as a case study. API-tizing their own applications to leverage within themselves. As an organization matures, they start to, and especially very large organizations mature, they tend to go use API across lines of business. And this is where they really see the value of the API start coming to fruition, and where it can start to they start identifying things across lines of businesses and making APIs that will take them to the next step, which could be partner or that external APIs. Now, on a different aspect, enterprises are starting to consume a lot more cloud-based services and are leveraging APIs and services from outside, from third parties. And in fact, this is happening a lot. And so one of the aspects is that I probably won't go into today, and I think deserves its own own segment, is how this slide that you're looking at is the scenarios of the APIs, how enterprises are adopting APIs internally. And like I was saying, I think that the consumption of third-party APIs and how you control and manage that consumption is going to, it almost, I think it deserves almost a webcast and a paper and thought of its own, because that is going to be a growing concern as more and more enterprises consume third-party APIs and share APIs outwards. And then finally, the fourth pattern that we're seeing for internal adoption is this whole notion of simply, as larger companies start acquiring businesses, they're leveraging APIs as a way to make that acquisition smoother, right? Because the faster you can integrate your acquisition, the better off you're going to be. So they're leveraging APIs in that realm from an internal perspective. Those are just four of the key stakeholders. Now, in my webinar a few weeks ago, I introduced this notion of the business impact of API adoption patterns that a colleague from Nordic APIs, Andreas Krohn, and I talked briefly about in February when we were at the API Strategy and Practice Conference in Amsterdam. And he built this nice chart, and I stole it from him. But for very large companies, the potential business impact is high when adopting APIs internally. And this really starts this high notion, high impact to medium, realistically a medium impact to begin with, really starts benefiting when you're starting to go across lines of businesses. Because while realistically it's medium, I would almost contend back, I'd argue back, it is high as your maturity grows, because once you have your internal house in order, it'll be much easier to obtain the high to very high potentials that releasing partner and public APIs will give you. So with that, let's start getting more focused on these internal APIs and talk a little bit about APIs and SOA. It is now pretty much well understood in the industry that APIs are an extension of SOA. That's how I say it. And when you look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant of 2013, it lays out the whole application services governance as their term for this whole notion of converged SOA and API management philosophies. Other analysts like Forrester, Red Monk are all singing approximately the same tune for now on the whole notion of how APIs and SOA relates to each other. So I'm going to take a few minutes here and give you my take on it. There are just some few quick bullet points that I put down to help me talk around some of the messages around this. But when I think of APIs, how APIs came about and where SOA came from, you got to look at it on different levels. Okay, first you got to look at it on approach level. APIs came about because they became a product, right? And APIs are a product that can have a API in the. When I say API in the terminology sense, I'm talking about the API terminology of today, right? And APIs became today, when you talk about them, they're known as more of a product, more of an external facing thing, right? But that's just a terminology. We all know that APIs are application programming interfaces. But in this new terminology, APIs are a product. They have a direct or indirect tie to revenue, and they need to. That's how they're approached. When we take a look at how services was approached, SOA services were utilized to make enterprises more agile, to break down the business processes into composable parts. Okay, so it makes sense that you have these SOA services that are in these composable parts that you can leverage for your productized APIs with some transformation, and we'll get back to that level. So there's different approaches. One is a product, one is more of a utility type of business for inside an enterprise. Now let's take a look at the consumption level. At the consumption level, APIs tend to have a larger number of consumers, and they focus on the ease of consumption through self-service. Okay, they have a larger number of consumers because they're a product, and that's the whole goal of the product. You want to have people adopt the product externally to partners and bring in that revenue. Okay, now when you look at the consumption level where SOA services came from, they tended to have a well-known consumer inside the enterprise. Maybe a few partners might have used them. There were fewer consumers, and they usually had, in order to bring a consumer on inside the enterprise or a partner, they had a more detailed onboarding process. Now with the convergence of SOA and API, the whole notion of that self-service, that ease of use, SOA is trying to take on those tendencies too, as it should, right? We've learned a lot from SOA, which allowed us to produce this API world that we see outside. But the API world has also taught the enterprise and the SOA world how to be more efficient, how to innovate faster and easier. So on the consumption level, we're seeing a lot of merging. That's where the merging really starts. Now, when we think about governance and management level, when we use the API term as the product term, it focuses, when you think about API management from a process level, it focuses on the product management task. That's really a product management methodology for how to take this API and to build this product, this API. Whereas SOA, when you take a look at the SOA governance, it really focuses on, the organizational structures that need to be put in place and the operational structures and plans and standards and approaches. And so those two are very complementary, and they rely on each other when you take a look from a governance and management level. Now, when you get down to a technical level, API and SOA governance require very similar runtime management capabilities, right? If you think about how you want to, the analytics you need to capture, the security, the rating and controlling, and the threat protection, and all of those type of things, they're very similar technology. In fact, it should be a single platform that helps manage both of those. So, with that, if we take a look today, here's a typical process flow of how APIs can extend the value of your existing apps and services. You take your apps and services, you transform and secure them. You might do SOAP to REST, mobile optimization type of capabilities. You will then publish those APIs, gather analytics, do some mediation maybe, and eventually you monetize, and apps are built and consumers are happy and you get new consumers. That is the process that your typical SOA to API bridge works today. Okay, so in essence, today an API is a feature of an existing product or application. It is something that is a value add over here on the side. No matter if this is an internal app or a product that your enterprises need to run efficiently within your enterprise, or if actually this is a product that your business puts out to consumers such as partners or the end user consumer. Okay. Where we need to go to though tomorrow is we really need to transform and move from where an API is a feature of an existing product to where the API is the product and everything else added onto it is features of a product and value add to the product. This will allow us to become more nimble and allow, like I said, you to reach consumers in ways that you haven't even dreamed of, and really establish yourself as a platform to grow and to build revenue. And again, this doesn't matter if this API or product is something that is used within your enterprise to run your business, or if it's something that you really sell outside your enterprise as well. So to get to the point where we take an API first approach, we have to really have an understanding of the lifecycle API. For example, there's a plans phase. This is where you will determine what your product is going to be, what the capabilities of the APIs are going to expose outward. What are the use cases? What's the business model, pricing, licensing, terms and conditions, security requirements, market segment, all of that type of stuff. You're planning all the way to, the architecture, design, and so forth of that API. There's a planning phase. Then there's the building phase. And eventually you get to the place where you're going to run the APIs and execute the APIs. You're going to share those APIs. Again, no, it doesn't matter if this API is internal or external. There is a sharing phase and a capabilities, and eventually you're going to analyze. And just like with any product, it's going to have a life cycle. It's going to continue to evolve, and so you just are continually going around and reinventing and extending your product. So there are individual tools or single platforms in the market to help with each phases of the life cycle. For example, build and plan. There's life cycle management tools for running. There's gateway tools, and for the socialization and productization of the APIs, there's developer portals. For this presentation, where we're going to focus on is really the gateway capability of an API platform. So what we're seeing is the emergence of two API architecture patterns in the market. Okay, one is the having a unified API gateway by itself, and the second one is dropping that API gateway in to an already existing infrastructure that has a purpose-built ESB, or adding on a purpose-built ESB to your unified gateway infrastructure as your needs grow. So just to level set you of what an API platform capabilities entail, typically the platform will do things such as licensing, quota management, PCI, enable you to certify PCI compliance, monitoring, OAuth, those type of things. You'll have something around lifecycle management of the APIs and services, right? Keeping being able to control both APIs and those SOA services as one. Manage application, manage those users, compliance. Your gateway, I'm going to go over to the portal first, the API portal. This is where you start to build your community inside your organization or outside your organization, allowing consumer app developers to search, find, document, socialize, communicate, all that kind of good stuff. Now, the important bit here is the gateway, right? The API gateway, the runtime, where the gateway enforces security, authentication, does protection, does encryption, mediation, provides quality of service, monitoring and alerting, page and caching, orchestration, and so forth. So those are the capabilities that we're looking for when you're picking out an API platform. So most of you are thinking, and this is a question I often get asked, is what is the difference between an API gateway and an ESB? The API gateway seems to do a lot of ESB capabilities. Remember, the ESB, or Enterprise Service Bus, is an architectural pattern, right? There are products on the market that emulate the pattern and label themselves ESB because that's what the industry and everybody wanted. They wanted a product for this pattern. And, we all know ESBs, and either love them or hate them or have a love-hate relationship with those traditional ESBs, but bottom line, they're in a lot of our large enterprises. So when we think about what the difference is of the ESB and gateway, the ESB intended to do system-to-system integration. Okay, it was there and typically they're quite rich with many adapters, right, connecting to all these different backend systems. They were designed with strong message orientation. They typically have heavy business process management and event processing, so they can do some really heavy lifting there on the back end. They were there to help provide things such as transaction rollback, right, which is very important in anything that provides transactions like banking and insurance and retail. And besides the adapters, the ESBs tended to be, very, very code centric. Well, now come to the API gateways, right? Now, the gateways, they have ESB tendencies. They do, right? Because ESB was an architectural pattern, okay? But the API gateways take it to the next level. They become the next generation platform because they allow not only for you to do some lightweight integration and orchestration, but they do this securely and expose and protect and encrypt and do threat protection and all of those things that you need to be able to cross boundaries within an enterprise or go external out to partners or to other businesses. These unified gateways tend to be policy driven, okay? They also tend to have caching capabilities, and most of them are a configuration-based approach. They take a configuration-based approach, or they allow you to be scripting-centric, right? Adapting and for the REST, JSON, XML based world that we are working with. Okay, so those are the kind of differences between what an ESB is and what an API gateway. So let's go back to our pattern. Okay, so let's say you don't have an ESB today and you're saying our internal house is in disarray. We've got all of these, SOA services all over. We have no control over them. We want to put some control in there. We want to start building this community and driving innovation and so forth and making ourselves more agile. So what you might want to do is drop in a unified API gateway. It's a great place to start and possibly all you need depending on your needs. This unified gateway should be easily snapped into your existing infrastructure. It can be used for both internal APIs, partner APIs, external APIs, mobile scenarios. Okay, so, and it does everything, I just listed a few key capabilities in the API gateway here that they should be able to, and a unified gateway will be able to handle, and the different protocols and what it'll talk to during the different, if you think about this as a layered architecture going from your backend systems up to your actual end users, what are the protocols and things that'll go through. Okay, but when you think of an API, there's actually two parts in API. There's the interface and the implementation. When you use the unified API gateway pattern, the interfaces and the implementations reside and is managed at the unified API gateway. Okay, so they're both in one place. Okay, so you're applying, securing, managing the interfaces, and actually doing the implementation on that unified gateway. That's a key distinction because let's talk about first a unified gateway. As I said, it's a good place to start. It gives you simplified architecture. It's lightweight. It lowers the skill level needed to deploy, run, and manage. It helps you get control over those existing services that that you've spent the last 10 years building but really haven't gotten a control over what is going on. It allows you then to control them and make it policy driven through configuration, so you can have standardized endpoints throughout your internal organization, and it allows you to get a quick return on investment. Again, the whole point of a unified gateway is to simplify your existing architecture, right? To give you a simplified unified architecture and to help drive you forward. Okay? So then you say, well, what about an ESB? I mean, I'm an enterprise. I've got WebSphere integration. I always forget. I'm a mess. I came from IBM. I grew up on WebSphere Message Broker, so I'm going to use Message Broker right now. So you got Message Broker in your in your environment, and you've got services. Can I use this unified gateway? How can I extend? Yes, your unified gateway should just plop in on top of your existing ESBs. Integrate to it, not technically on top of it, but figure of speech. But let's say you don't have one, but you wonder, well, do you need one? Okay, if there is a purpose-built ESB and there is a legacy system that you need to connect to, and this purpose-built ESB has adapters to make your life easier to connect to that legacy system, then yes, right? Go ahead and put that purpose-built ESB in there, okay? As long as it makes your life easier, okay? And allows you to, focus on your real business, okay? Other reasons why you might need an ESB, if you need assured delivery with transaction rollback capabilities. Those heavy ESBs are great at doing that. Another reason why you might want to separate your API gateway from your ESB is if you want to offload message processing, right? So you don't want to burden your gateway layer with that hard message processing, so you want to separate some concerns there. You might want to do that for a select few services. If you have complex orchestration or event processing that you need to do, that's another reason why you might need an ESB. And finally, off my list, why you put in a purpose-built ESB is basically to have a separation in concerns of your architecture. Really separate the interface from the implementation. So your architecture, if you had a purpose-built ESB, and you're separating your interface from your implementation, this is basically the architecture that you're looking for. Some folks might even, besides having a purpose-built ESB here, like I was saying before, maybe you might have some cloud integration capabilities that you're leveraging to integrate with some other systems. That's another reason why you might have a separation or another layer in your architecture. Okay, so I'm going to caution you, be careful if you want to start to put in a purpose-built ESB first if you don't already have one and you don't have the use cases that actually require one. Okay, really think about that, because you may never reach the unified API gateway level due to the complexities of setting up an ESB. Okay, so really think through the use cases for each component in your architecture to make sure you really need it. Okay, so what are the building blocks for your next generation platform? Okay, as I said before, you need to look at the full life cycle of an API and your services. So you need some life cycle management capabilities. Build the right APIs, build the right services the right way. I know, and we'll get to this in a little bit here, but some folks will say, SOA governance was heavy, and that you don't need that anymore. From an enterprise perspective, you're going to need governance. You're going to need this lifecycle management, as APIs are our product, and they'll say that, well, with DevOps you don't everything should run smooth. It should, but there's still life cycle management things that you need to control. Okay, so life cycle management will become important, but it'll change, right? It'll be more lightweight, more pragmatic, and we can talk about that in a little bit. The next thing you're going to need some service integration capabilities to simplify and speed up development. You've got your gateway services to secure and protect. In a unified gateway, those things are converged. You'll have developer engagement, which is really, how you build your developer and partner ecosystem. And then you're going to have analytics that really measure the impact of your programs. So when we take a look at the typical software development lifecycle flow and the different components and not components, but capabilities is more of it, the flow. You're going to have portfolio management, a list of services and APIs, assets that you have available running your business and are your product plannings. And that product or that capability is usually hooked up into your EA and BPM tools. So that's from a planning phase. You go into a life cycle management capability. This is really, your SCCMs and hooks into there. That's the repository that keeps track of all of the things from design that you need. Finally, you move over into a policy manager. This is how you apply the policies consistently across your enterprise, and then that controls and manages your API gateway, which is the actual runtime for which you expose your services, and then also interacts and works with your community manager from your developer portal. And all along this whole flow, you have auditing, monitoring, and analytics. Okay, so that's basically the typical SDL flow when you're working with. Excuse me? Oh, I thought somebody said something. When you're going through the whole SDSL flow for an API. Okay. So when you say, I always want to, everything we see about APIs and API platforms and API capabilities, it always has the connotation that you have to go outside your enterprise to do this, and that's what all APIs are for. As we just discussed through this whole presentation, APIs and services are closely related together, if not the same thing, and you should have a single unified platform to do that for you, to create that internal developer community, to create that getting your house in order. And this platform should be the same no matter if you're inside the organization or if you're outside the organization. So what companies are doing today is establishing an internal developer community where you have an API gateway running within your organization. You actually establish an API community within there for your own developers to communicate within the line of business and outside the line of business. This allows you to produce more effective applications for your enterprise, both internally and externally. As you mature, you then can go outside your enterprise. And this is just one architectural configuration. I actually put that, well, you would have a unified gateway running inside your organization, right, that is managing all your APIs, and then you would have not only a developer portal or community inside for your internal developer community, but you actually establish one outside your enterprise as well, but they're all interconnected and communicating with each other specifically for your external partners, for that external developer community. So you can start with one, get your internal house in order, and then move to the external developer community as you mature. So most enterprises today are still developing in silos, and you're unable to effectively reach your internal or external consumers. And this is, when I go into enterprises, this is typically what I see. There is usually an enterprise architecture team or a center of excellence that usually sets the standards and processes, and they, a few select individuals, know what is going on within all of the different lines of businesses. Each one of those different lines of businesses have established their own development team, and they have representatives on that architecture team. But when you get down to it, the individual developer in, for example, this line of business, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, has no idea what is going on over in this line of business and what things are available. And that's because just a few handful of people who are very, very busy basically become the gatekeepers of what's going on in the enterprise. There isn't a lot of communication and movement. So as an enterprise, we need to remove the siloed barriers to enable the internal developer community. Okay, so once you take a individual community, one line of business, open it up, they're able to produce more effective applications to reach even more of your consumers, because instead of, they can start leveraging what each other is doing, having innovative thoughts across the business instead of within a particular segment. Okay, so it opens their thoughts up and their resources and what have you up. And it also prepares your internal development team to on how to communicate and behave in a community to actually support that truly external developer community. So to extend the reach of your enterprise, beyond your borders and reach, this really reaches consumers in ways you haven't dreamed of, but you really need to start and create this whole, break down that barrier that we saw 3 slides before, and build this whole community internally so that you can more effectively reach outside your enterprise and truly expand and grow. With that, I will start answering some questions at this point. Let me exit out of here to see if I can.
Okay, well, we have a question that says, what are the key standards in use to make it interoperable with other gateways?
Interoperable with other gateways. There are some gateways out there that will, if you're talking about, if you want to take an existing API definition and move it one gateway to the next, there's some emergent standards that will, from an API documentation perspective, not necessarily from a policy perspective like security policy, but from a documentation perspective, letting you know what resources and parameters and all that kind of good stuff. Swagger is one of the emerging standards, and so is RAML. RAML is an open source definition that you all can participate in helping define. That is run by MuleSoft. SOA Software is active participant in that definition, so that allows a little bit more fuller definition of your APIs. So a lot of the API gateway vendors will support importing and exporting of Swagger or RAML. Waddle is still a standard that is used by most API gateway vendors, as well as some support WSDL to import and export.
Terrific.
It's really, as far as the definition of all the policies and the controls, the things that make the gateway actually run, right? So if you want to set a throttling policy or a security policy or a threat protection policy or any of those, there really isn't anything that makes it easily portable to the gateways for that business yet.
So let me just interject. So we've had a number of questions about the slide deck. Will we be publishing this slide deck on SlideShare?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll definitely be publishing it on SlideShare.
Terrific. So a couple more questions. What is the model for consumption by external users? The discovery, registration, authorization, and certification.
What is the model for consumption by external users?
I think the questioner means by external developers.
By external, what is the model for consumption? I asked them to elaborate on what by model of consumption,
Okay. All right. So
I think the model is, they need to be able to discover, right, from a developer portal. There needs to be some sort of self-registration capabilities where they can get API and secret for their application. They need to be able to test the app, authorize, get certified, and this is all typically done with a developer portal, what the industry terms a developer portal or a partner portal.
Terrific. How do you spell RAML?
RAML.
RAML.
Yeah, and you can get to it at raml.org.
Very good. Someone has shared that. Terrific. Are most API efforts and implementations RESTful? What about SOAP?
I would say most enterprises are moving toward a RESTful interface, just because that's what because it's simpler, it's easier than SOAP. That being said, we at SOA Software, we still see a lot of companies that are taking their existing partner connect, which are already SOAP, and moving those to an API platform first, and then they're going to work on making those SOAP-based services more capable and next. So what enterprises are doing is they're putting in these unified gateways and platforms, because previously there was no management of their partner connect. They were just doing one-off connections, straight through connections. They had security in there, but they weren't managed like what an API platform can give you, right? So their first step is popping in one of these unified gateway platforms, give them a little bit more control, give their partners a little bit more control and communication and ease of onboarding, and then as they grow and move, they're making those APIs more consumable.
So question is, can you share some examples of how customers can reach consumers in ways they can't even dream of? Can you give an example or two of that?
I think one of the interesting things that I've seen personally happen is in the farming industry. I come from Minnesota. All my relatives are farmers, and I just spent this past weekend with some of my relatives and going through all the different farm equipment that they have to help them with farming today, and everything they do today it's quite amazing. Everything they do in the field is linked to data and understanding what section of the field they should plant what type of corn or beans, or process that information based on yield and so forth. It's absolutely amazing. That data gets fed back into, for example, if they've got John Deere equipment or Case equipment, that gets back and analyzed, and if they want, shared with other farmers so that they more effectively farm and give us the food. It's quite amazing. In fact, you go to John Deere has a lot on the different APIs that they're using and partners and ways they are performing farming. Something basic, something that we eat food every day that you don't think about it, but I was I'm blown away with some of the stuff that's going on.
So just a reminder that if we can't get to your question today, Laura is going to blog about this session and answer any unanswered questions. Okay, so don't fret if we don't get to your question, but we have several more. Is there a sandbox backend for testing the API against?
Yes, there typically, it depends on what type of the API it is. Especially any API that does any transaction, there's usually a sandbox API that's made out to the developer. And then once the developer has completed their application, typically there's a certification process that happens, especially in the banking, insurance industries, and retail industries where you're making some changes to back. There's usually a certification process, but definitely, and usually the sandbox should be provided as part of your API platform. It should just be an instantiation of your API platform.
The question is, would you typically have an internal gateway and an external gateway in the DMZ to support both internal and external developers? On the diagram you show only one gateway.
I think the answer is depends. The gateway doesn't have, your internal gateway doesn't have to be in the DMZ, right? The internal gateway can be inside your organization, inside your enterprise boundaries, and servicing your internal APIs. Typically, I would be you could have that internal gateway reside within the DMZ as well, but typically what I do find is that we'll have either the API gateway inside the enterprise, and you might have an appliance, a security appliance of some sort in your DMZ that gives you access to that internal gateway, or you have that internal gateway side out. You have not an internal gateway, you have another external gateway in your DMZ. So there's several different configurations based on your company's security and policy needs, your operational well.
Question says, can you provide any advice or examples for this approach to advance healthcare interoperability? And I think we have a previous webinar that's recorded on this related topic on healthcare APIs. But do you have anything to add to that, Laura? Do we have any healthcare interoperability examples?
Yes, we do. I can post that on the reply, or if you email me directly, I can send it. Got previous webinars, and we just came out with a case study with Australian healthcare provider.
Okay, so question is, and sorry if you feel, we've turned off the slideshow, so if you're just looking at sort of a blank screen, we apologize. We're just doing Q&A now. Question is, what is the monetization process, or is it a build it and they will come mode? I guess, how do people approach that?
So the monetization process is really, it comes to what I said before when you take a look at the differences between SOA and APIs. When I take the term API and define it as a product, from a monetization standpoint, it's just that. You basically need API product manager, someone that can do market segment for your API, developer market segment. So are you going after specific known partners? Are you going after a particular type of app developer, because there's a whole different range of flavors of app developers out there in different market segments. So you need someone that understands how to do that market segment, and then also how you would then your pricing models, right? So it for transaction, monthly subscription, and basically can understand, how to price that thing right. And then those things are then interpreted into actionable events or policies within your API management system to enforce. But just like SOA, a lot of the work from an API perspective, if you're truly going after monetization, right? And when I say monetization, there's a spectrum of monetization too, because you get direct revenue or indirect revenue. What I mean by indirect revenue is that you're using these APIs to drive traffic or revenue to a different channel, right? So it's the API itself is not going to bring in revenue, but it indirectly increases another set of revenue. So monetization is a big thing. But if you're actually having an API that makes money, or where an API that makes money, because even if you want to pay a developer a commission for transactions they sent, it's all about that. It's more of the non-functional business side, not even related to API platforms, that you need to be concerned about, right? If you're going to do monetization, you need an API product manager, someone that understands the business and how to make a business.
Very good. Now, we have a question here, and I'm pretty sure it's not from an SOA software employee, so I just want to make that disclaimer. Just at a high level, can you list SOA software products that map to some of the concepts you have shared seminar?
What we have, I just recently moved to SOA Software. I actually built IBM's API management solution, and one of the reasons why I decided to change my career and move to SOA Software was, one, I wanted to make a bigger impact in the API economy, because the next few years are going to be absolutely amazing, and that was SOA Software. The next reason is because of how integrated SOA Software stack is, and it's not a bunch of bit parts. So what you would need is what I call manager, and community manager is basically what I think is the top level product, and underneath it is what's called policy manager. Okay, so community manager runs on top of policy manager, with one component in your operating system. Policy manager really is that gateway, that unified gateway, where community manager brings that whole community, building a community with your policies, and provides the monetization and so forth. Policy manager then talks to lifecycle manager, and lifecycle manager is really that repository from a design time perspective that really streamline the development of your APIs and services, and give the business the control and look that they want. And then finally, you've got the portfolio management, and you don't have to take the full stack as one. You can add in, if you don't need the lifecycle or lifecycle or portfolio manager, you can really just get the capabilities from community manager and policy manager. The other thing is if you're an existing Data Power customer or a Microsoft customer, policy manager works extremely well with both of those two. So you can leverage as for the runtime component, the policy manager can configure and work with Data Power and deploy policies onto Data Power, configure it, and everything. And same way with Microsoft. So it's very, very powerful tool set that works well in large very large enterprise heterogeneous environment. So that's my short, long answer.
Okay. So I think we're pretty much out of time, but definitely invite people to visit resource.soa.com. A lot of additional information for the background that we've discussed today. Some questions have come in about what are sources for other information. Laura has put her email on the screen. She's available to you. Do you have any final comments to wrap up, Laura?
Sorry, I went on mute. Thanks everybody for joining. Again, if you have any questions or want to chat, feel free to give me a call at any time, and I'd be happy to help.
All right, thank you very much. And just a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar. It takes a couple days to put the recording together, so be patient, but you'll get it. And in the meantime, we look forward to being in touch. Thank you very much.